He got the tissues ready for me in case I make myself cry, which would be a very impressive Dvar Torah. So nice to be with you all, especially on this so many occasions being celebrated today. This Parsha Re'eh contains some of my favorite verses in that they are so confusing and contradictory, and conveniently, we happen to read them today, so that's really fortuitous. So you'll remember that in our reading today, we read about the issue of there being people who are in need in the land when we get into the land of Israel. Okay, and so the opening, that sort of section begins, the Hebrew says, V'efes ki lo yeh becha evyon, there shall be no needy among you. And then it goes on and says, because your God will bless you in the land that your God is giving you. If only you heed God and take care, follow this instruction, ki lo yeh becha evyon, there will not be any needy among you. We begin that section by talking about what a dream. We're going to get into the land, we're going to follow the Torah, we're going to do the mitzvot, and we're going to be living in this idealized Gan Eden, this Garden of Eden, where there will be no need. Everyone will have exactly what they need. And then a couple verses later, things get a little shaky. It says, Ki yevecha evyon me'echad achecha be'echad sha'arecha ba'artzecha. It says, but, and there the ki is a little bit of a confusing word. You can read the ki as, if there are needy among you, or when there are needy among you. And then the Torah goes on to say, you should surely open your hand and make sure people have what they need. But it's like, wait a minute, just a few verses earlier you told me there was going to be no needy once we get in the land. If we just follow the Torah, do what is right, there's going to be no need. And then we get this kind of interesting ambivalent statement of, if somehow it happens that there are needy, here's what you should do, you should be generous. Or, even more tricky, when there are needy, how do you align that with the previous verse? Okay, we're sticking to it. And then just a few verses later, it gets worse. Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerev haaretz, for there shall never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kin in your land. We begin this section with this promise, Ki lo yeh becha evyon, there shall be no needy. There's going to be this idyllic dream state of everyone will have what they need. Then we get into this iffy middle ground of, well, if or when, here's how you should handle the situation. And we end not quite with a promise, but kind of like the doomsday, heartbreaking realization of, Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerev haaretz, there will never cease to be need. How are we meant to make sense of these direct contradictions within? It's not like one place in the Torah it says something over here, and then, in another book, it's like they're really in the span of 5-6 verses from each other. How do we understand this? And I think that what it must be is the Torah is talking to us in a way that it knows we need to hear. The Torah is speaking to us in a language so that we can hear it, meaning what? That if the Torah just said, if it only gave us the beginning part, when you get into the land, there will be no needy, what would we do? We would do nothing, because everyone would be fine, right? We would be totally complacent. How amazing we live in this idyllic dream world where everyone has what they need. I don't need to look after you. You don't need to look after me. No one needs to worry about anyone. We're just going to be in a state of inaction because God has taken care of everything for us. And if we only had the end, if we only had, there will never cease to be needy in the land, what would we do? We would do nothing, because we would be so paralyzed by the sort of the overwhelming, heartbreaking reality that nothing that we do is ever going to really make a difference. We're not ever going to really be able to chip away at the problem. So what's the point of doing anything? There's never going to be cease to be needy from the land. And so the Torah kind of breaks it to us in steps. First, the Torah says, it's possible. There is another world that is possible. We just have to hope and dream for it. It is possible that one day we will get to a place of there will be no needy in the land. And then the Torah begins to kind of like break it to us, but like it might be that we don't get to that state so quickly, right? It might be, or when, or if that happens, here's what you should do. Here's how to handle the reality. And then the Torah gives it to us real and says, actually, there's never going to cease to be needy in the land. But because the Torah has prepared us and said, first you have to hold on to that dream. Even when there will never cease to be needy, you still can't give up on the dream. You have to hold on to the dream. That has to be your starting point, this orientation of hope. And then I'm going to give you instructions on what to do when that dream is not met. And then I'm going to give you the reality of, okay, it's true. There's never going to cease to be needy, but don't give up. Don't give in. Don't succumb to those overwhelming feelings, because we still have the dream in part A. That's what we're striving for. And when I was reading this parsha, I was thinking about the ongoing cycles of war that we find ourselves in. And I was wondering if we couldn't read these verses, not talking about need, but maybe talking about our struggles between ongoing cycles of war and peace. And if we reimagine these verses, you might imagine that the beginning of this section would say, when you get into the land and you follow the Torah and you do everything right, there will never be war. You're finally going to have peace. There is only going to be peace in the land. And then you might imagine the next verse would say, well, but if or when there are disagreements or there are wars, here's how you should handle them. And then you could imagine the end of that section that will say, there will never cease to be war in the land, right? That heartbreaking reality. And reading it through that lens, I wonder if what the Torah is telling us is if we only had the end of that section, the reality, perhaps, there will never cease to be war, we would be so broken that we couldn't do anything. And if we only had the first part, there will only be peace. We wouldn't have to work hard to make sure there was no war, because we would be, again, living in the state of complacency. And so too here, the Torah is kind of breaking us in and saying, what do you have to do with the reality of the world? You always have to start from the place of the dream. What is the world that we refuse to give up on? What is the thing that we are striving and hoping for? And then you have this middle ground of, and when that doesn't come to fruition, here are the practical things. Here are the steps you need to do, right? Open your hand, be generous, find a way to speak to your neighbor. And then the Torah brings us to the reality, which is, okay, we're not going to get to that place, but because we're holding onto the dream, maybe we're better able to live in the reality. There's this really interesting commentary when God is talking about Noah building the ark and going into it for the flood. The Torah says that Noah goes into the ark mipnei hamabul, because of the flood. Now, you might think that that's interesting. You would say, well, I would have thought that Noah would go into the ark because God told him to, right? God said there was going to be a flood. God told him to go into the ark, just go in. And the commentator is Rashi reads it as saying, no. Noah built the ark like God told him to do, but he wouldn't go in it. He only got in the ark at the last moment when literally the flood waters were pushing him in. He waited to the last minute. And Rashi says about Noah, who was supposed to be one of the most righteous people in his generation, he says that Noah was ma'amin ve'eno ma'amin, that he believed and he didn't believe. In fact, he says something even more scathing than that. He says that Noah was a person of little faith. What is it? In what way was Noah a person of little faith? Because he believed and he didn't believe. What does that mean? It means that Noah believed enough when God said there was going to be a flood to build the ark. But he didn't believe enough that the flood was actually going to come to get into the ark, which is why he waited until that last minute, until he got in mipnei hamabul, because of the flood. I have a dear colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi Avi Kilip, who teaches on this commentary of Rashi about Noah that he believed and didn't believe. She writes this. She says, Noah was able to both believe and not believe simultaneously. Maybe pure belief, emunah shlema, would have been too overwhelming and debilitating. It was the disposition that allowed Noah to work day after day, building an ark, some magic combination of belief and disbelief. Meaning that if Noah had believed fully in what God said, believed in the worst case scenario that God was going to destroy the world with the flood, Noah would have been so broken he wouldn't have been able to do the actual work that needed to be done to build the boat that was going to save some of humanity from the flood, right? That he had to both believe enough to know that there was a crisis and he needed to meet it, but he had to not believe enough because had he fully given in to that reality, he wouldn't have been able to do the work that was asked of him. And I wonder if we also need that kind of magic combination. We have to believe enough this doomsday reality that there will never cease to be needy from the land. We have to believe enough that perhaps war will never cease, such that we are able to do the real work that is required to make sure people have what they need, to work through disagreements, to find a way to come together. We talked about togetherness and community building last night, but if we really believed with all of our hearts that war will never cease to end from the land or there will never cease to be needy, we just couldn't do the work we need. It would be too debilitating. And I think that what this Torah section is teaching us is it's teaching us something about hope, and that's what we're going to be speaking about after Kiddush. We're going to be talking about hope. It's teaching us what does it mean to have hope, in the face of so much brokenness, and that it would be so easy to give up on hope. It's teaching us that you always have to hold on to the dream, right? You always have to start at that beginning of the section of there is another world possible, and I refuse to give up on that world. And at the same time, what is the work that I need to do in this world, in this broken world, to get from where I am now to that place? And so I'm just hoping for us on this Shabbat that we have the strength within us to be able to live in the reality of this world, the brokenness of this world, but also have the ability to not give up on, to hold on to the hope that maybe one day we can get to that beginning. We can get to there will be no needy. We can get to there will be no war, and that our hope will be the thing that gets us there. Shabbat shalom.